Hi, my name is Isaac Fisher. I run Pachyderm Furniture Works here in Fort Bragg, California, and Ron Hawk has asked me to say a few words about planes and how to shape them to fit your hand and your work. So we'll start out today with a couple of general observations about how to shape the planes, and then we'll go into some specifics about these planes on the wall behind me and how I use them and why we have such a variety of shapes. Let's start out about something that you do before glue up. This is one of Ron's plane kits, and it comes like this: two cheeks, the rear ramp, and the front ramp. I like to make a cutout on the front ramp, and what that lets you do is after the plane is assembled, you can reach inside a little easier to clear away shavings when they get stuck through. This is about the shape that you'd want to cut to. I just drew this with a roll of tape, and here's one that I've cut. You can see that I left a little bit of the bottom here. You don't want to cut all the way down. Leave a little bit of the original surface. And let's move on to the sides. I like to leave the sides flat rather than the coffin shapes or some of the other more sculptured sides. The reason for that is that I often use these planes on their sides with a shooting board or just on the bench, and that lets me have a nice square edge. I also make sure that I keep this nice and square, particularly on joiner planes and on shooting planes, and we'll go more into that later. You can notice that on this plane I have nice chamfers here, down the sides, everywhere that my hands are going to be sitting. On this plane I have roundovers, and they serve the same function. They're to prevent your hands from getting tired and getting scratched and cut as you work. It makes the plane a lot more comfortable to use, and it means that you don't get distracted and start making mistakes. There are plenty of other ways to make mistakes. You don't need to add any into your work. The important thing is to make sure that you keep a nice, comfortable shape on the plane. You can see here that I have access all around the iron, the plane iron assembly, and the wedge. It's important that you leave enough room to get a hammer in so you can tap on both sides on the top of the iron, be able to hit the wedge, and be able to hit somewhere on the back of the plane. Things shouldn't be so close together that if you try to hit the wedge, you end up hitting the iron or the chip breaker. I like to leave at least ½ inch of the iron exposed on the sides. The final thing to talk about is the way that you hold the plane. This is a small plane, and it's used with one hand. I like this rounded back. Put my hand right here, and my fingers go right over the top, but I'm not touching the iron. If you're pushing on the iron, it's hard, it's cold, and it's another thing that's uncomfortable. On this plane, it's a two-handed plane, and for two-handed use, I like this concave shape. I keep one hand in front and one in the back, and it serves the same purpose. As I push, this hollow is something to stop my hand, a place that I can hold it. One final note: people like to put a little round over or ease the edges on the bottom of their plane. I do that as well. It makes it slide easier over the wood, and it's more comfortable to use, less likely to splinter. But I keep the front edge square. The reason for that is that as I work, I don't want dust and shavings to get caught under the plane. I want them to be pushed out of the way so that I can take a full stroke without riding up onto something. let's talk a little bit about some of these specific shapes. Start again with the joiner plane. I just talked about using this with two hands, but again, put my backhand here in the hollow. I've got the nice chamfers, it's comfortable, and I wrap my fingers around the bottom a little bit. In the front, I put my hand here and capture the corner and wrap my fingers around. What this plane is used for is making long joints. If I have a tabletop with several boards, I want to fit the joints. Here's a nice long board. And as I use this plane, I have one hand in the front. And, see how I have my thumb over the top, my fingers underneath, my right hand back here. I'm right-handed, so I have my force with the right hand. I start the plane with pressure on the left hand, push through. Here in the middle, I have equal pressure. And as I go out the end, I'm pushing just with my right hand. There's a nice full-length shaving. I use this plane for doing edge joints, also for entry doors, for anything that has a nice long straight edge. This is another joiner plane. It's a little shorter. This one's about 15 inches. This one's about 12 inches, I think. Both of these are shorter than a metal joiner plane. I think those usually are somewhere in the neighborhood of 22 or 24 inches. But I've never wanted something longer, and I find that if a wooden plane is too long, I end up flattening it too often. The wood does move over time, so I don't like them to be any longer than is necessary. So this joiner plane, I can use for a straight edge like this also, but I typically use it for panels and veneers, anything that's small. It has a 1-inch iron, or this joiner plane has a 1.5. The 1-inch iron saved me a little time in sharpening. It's easier to sharpen and less work. And here's a special shooting board that I've made that I use with it quite a bit. Here's a piece of veneer. I saw this here in the shop. It's about 1/16 of an inch thick. If I put this in the vise and try and run a joiner plane over it, there's not much reference. It's hard to stay square. The piece wobbles. It just doesn't work very well. So what I'll do is I put it here on this shooting board. This piece holds it down, keeps it nice and flat, and then I can run the plane on its side down the edge. You can see as I do that, I have a one-handed grip on it. That's why it has this curve, just like this plane. I put my palm over the top and then wrap my fingers in around the cross pin. I've got a nice grip on it, and I can use my other hand to keep the veneer stationary. Here's another shooting board. This shooting board is used for making square ends. And here's a shooting plane that I built specifically for this. I use this exclusively for shooting. See here, we have some square ends, but they have saw marks. There's a little bit of something on the end here, some pencil marks, so we'll take that off. Go ahead and put the piece up against the fence, and then run the joiner, or run the shooting plane along the edge here, and it makes a nice cut. So It was a little off square before. It's mostly square now. Coming down to the very end of it, and if we keep going, it'll be completely square. The thing about this plane is that because it's used exclusively on the shooting board, it has very little shape at all. You can see the front half is just about the way it came out of the clamps when I glued it up. I eased the edges a little bit, but the only place that my hand really contacts is right here. And I've scooped this out a little bit. My hand sits well behind the blade. When I hold it here, just put my palm into the hollow there and wrap my fingers around, and there we go. One other important aspect of a shooting plane is the sides need to be square. Let's move on to this plane. This is an edge plane. It's used on the edges of boards just like a joiner, but it's about half the length. The joiner plane, again, is about 15 inches. They both have 1.5-inch irons, so we can work a variety of different widths. But this one lets me get in and work a particular area. This little piece of would be too big for a joiner plane, or excuse me, the joiner plane would be too big for the wood. And in addition, the grain in this piece is arching. So we need to come in from both directions. That's where this plane comes in handy. It's small and maneuverable, so I can come in here and come back this way. I stop about halfway in between. I've got a nice smooth surface all the way across. This was one of the first planes I made, and I made a mistake because I didn't allow enough room for my hand back here. So as I push on this, the webbing of my thumb and my finger run up under the blade, and after a few minutes, that becomes pretty uncomfortable. It is very comfortable this way. I can use this one-handed pulling so that as I'm standing here with this board, and I need to go from both directions, I can save myself time, and every minute is key when I'm trying to make a living. So I don't have to walk around and walk back. It's not too bad in one piece, but if I do 20 pieces, it adds up. There's one other thing that I use this plane for quite a bit. I could do it with any plane, but I like this one. The edges are nice and square. I can put it here in the vise, get a nice grip on it, and then this small little wedge that I want to fit into this plane. So how do I flatten the back of this? I can't put it over the joiner because it wouldn't even span the gap. It'd be extremely dangerous. So I just do it right here. I push it over with my thumb, and when it gets halfway, I reach on the other side and pull it through. It's like having a miniature joiner at your bench. So let's move on to these two planes. These are both polishing planes or smoothing planes. And again, they're smaller than a metal smoothing plane. But I like the small size. And what these are used for is working a large area. Right here, you have a dent. So, how do I get rid of that dent? If I use a long plane, I have to take down the entire surface of the board. It's a lot of time, and I don't really want to lose the thickness out here at the edges where the joinery of the door might be. So, I'll use this short plane. And this small smoothing plane has a wide iron, so it takes a pretty wide cut, and it lets me work a small area. So I can clean this up without removing material out here. So I'll mark this so we can keep track of where we're cutting. So you can see as I do this, I have my hand over, my fingers hooked around the cross pin, and I'm not running my hand on the iron. I have my thumb up here to help steer the plane because I skew the plane as I go, and what that does is lower the angle of the blade, gives a cleaner cut, and my thumb here gives me pressure to help the blade from spinning as I push here. But I'm not really applying pressure there. So this dent is almost gone now. If I keep working it, we'll get there eventually, and we don't have to touch the surrounding area. And you can see here, it still is very flat. I mentioned earlier that I had 2 of these planes, and the reason for that comes down to efficiency. I'm trying to make a living here in the shop, and time spent sharpening doesn't make me money. So I sharpen both of these planes. This one I use to do most of the work, and then I do the final cuts with this plane. Then I do more rough work, and then more final cuts. And this plane just keeps getting duller, but it doesn't really matter because finishing plane comes back and does all the nice cuts at the end, and it stays sharp. And if it gets dull, I can sharpen it. But I don't worry about this one too much. Here's a block plane. It has a similar shape. Again, it's a one-handed plane, but it's only 1.25 inches wide. This plane is a little too cumbersome to hold up in the air. It's heavy, and I have smaller hands, so I have to grip pretty hard to keep control of it if I'm not using it down on the bench. This plane is much easier to have my hand around it. It's very comfortable because I have the rounded area back here to keep my hand away from the iron. Here's a little mock-up of a cabinet door. It was a test for the joinery. If I were to glue this up, I might come back and clean up the joint with the block plane. Just working around the corner. It's small and maneuverable. Works really well in these areas, making corners. I can see what the grain is like around it. So that right here, where the grain reverses, I know to stop at the right place. Then after I've done that, I can pick it up. So there's a quick chamfer. And we'll go this way. There's another quick chamfer. This plane lets me work fast. Up here in the air, I can hold the piece, have full control over everything, and I don't have to fuss around with clamps. Here's another block plane, and this is another early plane that I made. It has the same problem here. This time it's a one-handed plane, but again, the iron is right there. So I'm reminded not to do that. Here's another early plane, and I really like this plane. I think it's a really beautiful shape. I spent a lot of time shaping this. It feels really good right here, and it doesn't feel good at all in any other position. It has this sharp point here, and it just makes it nearly unusable. So it goes back on the shelf. It just looks good. Here's one final plane. It's a tiny little block plane, and it gets used for many of the same tasks as this one, but you can see the difference in size. This plane is about 6 inches or so. This one is 3 or 3.5 inches. It's got a 1-inch iron. It's light. I can wrap my whole hand around it. Really good control. And you can do really fine detailed work with this, or I take it out into the machine room with me, stick it in the pocket of my apron, and I have it on hand if I need it. Quite a variety of shapes here. They let me do a great variety of work, and as you think about the work that you'd like to do, and you're working on your planes and shaping them, you can think through some of these tips and make your planes comfortable and very functional. Enjoy your woodworking. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.